Now, we always have a but, because that's what we do. We go, but he can't be this. But you've got to mean only for people who it's got to be all about. I want to show you that God's heart is so good that even in the Old Testament, when God would flash signs that man interprets as a God full of vengeance and fury, he's a heartbeat away from showing the goodness. And all he's ever waiting for is someone to come seek his face. I want you to go with me to Exodus, and I want to show you, and I've spent a few minutes setting this up so that you can trust this statement. I want to show you the bad news today. So you come to church, you hear, what's gospel mean? Everybody knows that. We've done a pretty good job of the last 20 years explaining to people that gospel means good news. Okay, so the gospel is good news. If it's bad news, it's not the gospel. Plain and simple. There's no room for bad news in the gospel. Okay? I used to hear this. Well, the good news is only good if you tell them the bad news first. So we'd preach for 45 minutes on the bad news, and then 5 minutes of just as I am was all good news. Good news, all the stuff I just told you, you don't have to have. You can accept Jesus. It's like 9/10 of every week was bad news. Set through the bad news, you get a little bit of good news. Okay, that's not the gospel. The gospel is good news. But the Bible is not always full of people hearing good news. Sometimes they hear bad news. Exodus chapter 33, we are coming fresh off the heels of God sending Moses down Sinai with 10 commandments, and the children of Israel have been worshiping a golden cow that magically appeared according to Aaron, because everybody took their earrings off, he threw them in the fire, and out jumped a cow. And Aaron goes, this thing came out when I put this in the fire. Because that is always how we explain our idolatry to God. I don't know, it just happened. Because there's a lot of truth to that. We don't know how it happens. It happens because we put our focus somewhere other than on who he is. Well, he's at the top of a mountain in this story, and we're at the bottom of a mountain. We are not there, but you're here in the purposes of this story. At the bottom of a mountain, God comes down. Moses, of course, 3,000 people die at the base of that mountain because they've been placed under the law. Law immediately goes to work. When law goes to work, people die. Never forget that. The ministry of death and the ministry of condemnation, according to the Apostle Paul, 2 Corinthians 3. The ministry of death and the ministry of condemnation was written and engraved on stones, and the glory that is on it fades away instantly. The shine's off the penny when it comes to the law. The minute you put people under it, the shine comes off the penny. Because the minute you put them under it, they realize they're unworthy. They can't do it. And the minute they realize they can't do it, they walk into condemnation. So people begin to die. And this happens, Exodus 33:1. The Lord said to Moses, depart and go up from here, you and the people whom you've brought out of the land of Egypt, to the land of which I swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, saying, to your descendants I will give it. And I will send my angel before you, and he will drive out the Canaanite, the Amorite, the Hittite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, the Jebusite. Go up to a land flowing with milk and honey, for I will not go up in your midst, lest I consume you on the way. For you're a stiff-necked people. That's the word stubborn. Let me read that verse to you again. You guys go on up to a land flowing with milk and honey. I will not go up in your midst, lest I consume you on the way, because you're a stubborn people. And when the people heard this bad news, they mourned, and no one put on his ornaments. What did the people hear in verse 4? Bad news. This is the opposite of good news. You just heard the opposite of the gospel. Let me ask you what the opposite of the gospel is according to Exodus chapter 33. Is the opposite of the gospel, you guys are going to go to hell. The opposite of the gospel, you guys are going to die. Now, the opposite of the gospel, the bad news that Israel heard was, I will not be in your midst. I will not live inside of you. Bad news. I'm not going to live inside of you because now you're on your own. Good luck. It's a big world and it's tough, and I'm not going with you. Now, how's that to start an adventure? Good luck on the journey. I'll meet you when you get back. Hope it all goes well. Fingers are crossed. Praying for you. You get back, we'll see how it goes. And God speaks to Israel and says, I will not go up among you because you're a stubborn people. I'm afraid that if I go up among you, I'll destroy you. Verse 5, for the Lord said to Moses, say to the children of Israel, you're a stubborn people. I could come into your midst in one moment and consume you. Now, therefore, take off your ornaments that I may know what to do with you. Your ornaments are your jewelry. This is the connection to Egypt, the remaining connection to Egypt that Israel has adorning their external body. It's what was left over after the cow jumped out of the fire. Remember when the cow jumped out of the fire a second ago? This is all the jewelry they have left over. It's enough jewelry to make another cow. I think that's the message being sent to you in the text. You carry enough jewelry into this wilderness to make another cow. What do I want you to do with the jewelry? The children of Israel stripped themselves of their ornaments by Mount Horeb. And so God has given bad news to Israel. Bad news, I'm not going to be in your midst. This is the quintessential first message of the Old Covenant coming down the mountain. God comes down the mountain, judges Israel for the idolatry. 3,000 people die, and the bad news begins to be preached. Bad news. Because of the way you live, I will not live in your midst. Bad news. Because of your potential for idolatry, I will not dwell among you. Bad news. You're bad people. I just figured it out at the top of that mountain. You're bad. I didn't even leave you for 2 days. I come back down, you've all abandoned me. You know what? You can have it. You're on your own. Bad news. Good luck. It's bad news. So Moses goes to God by himself, approaches the Father. And in Exodus chapter 33, verse 12, Moses says to the Lord, "See, you say to me, bring up this people, but you haven't let me know whom you will send with me. Yet you said, I know you by name, and you also found grace in my sight. Now therefore I pray, if I have found grace in your sight, show me now your way, that I may know you, that I may find grace in your sight, and consider this nation your people." Look at that prayer. Consider this nation your people. Somebody mediates God on behalf of Israel and says, please consider this nation your people. And he said, my presence will go with you. I will give you rest. And Moses said to God, if your presence doesn't go with us, don't bring us up from here. That's a good prayer. If you're not going to go, we don't want to go. 16, for how then will it be known that your people and I have found grace in your sight, except you go with us? So we shall be separate, your people and I, from all the people on the face of the earth. And the Lord said to Moses, I will also do this thing that you've spoken, for you have found grace in my sight, and I know you by name. What just happened? Somebody appeals to grace. Under the performance of the law, God says, bad news. If it's you and your performance, and you and your jewelry, you and your golden cows, you don't have room for me. One man appeals to grace. There is more power in the grace of God than you can possibly imagine. And it's not something God has added. It's something that's always in God's heart. He's just waiting for man to appeal to his grace. When Paul figures this revelation in Romans and says that where sin abounds, grace does what? Much more abound. We all know that in the church. What does Paul mean? Wherever sin is in abundance, grace is in superabundance. Why? Because wherever you have a great lack or bad news or abandonment or a hole in your soul, what you need is a great amount of who God really is. You need a great amount of what God really is. And so Moses appeals to God and says, show us your grace. So the Lord said to Moses, I'll do this thing that you've spoken. You know you've found grace in my sight, and I know you by name. 18. And he said, please, show me your glory. And God said to Moses, I will make all my goodness pass before you. And I will proclaim the name of the Lord before you. I'll be gracious to whom I'll be gracious. I'll have compassion on whom I will have compassion. Let me ask you this. When Moses asks for the glory of God, which he just saw manifested at the base of Sinai and 3,000 people die. When Moses asks for the glory of God, what does God say he's going to give him? I will make all my goodness pass before you. Moses, you found my heart. My heart is grace. If I'm forced to deal with this people by law, I'd rather not walk in the middle of them. If all I've got is their performance, I got to stay away. Because if all they can bring to me is their jewelry and their golden cows and their performance, it's best that they and I not have a relationship. Right? It's best to not have a relationship because all we really need is a religion. They appeal to me, they kill lambs, they feel better about themselves, we all go our separate ways. Bad news, it's the best I can do under law. but my heart is grace.